we are going to finish off these notes, and we're going to start by looking at problem F. Problem F. And F looks pretty complicated. We're going to try to make it as nice as possible. And we really have two methods for simplifying trigonometric expressions right now. The first one would be changing things in terms of sine and cosine, and the second thing would be substituting a known identity. In this situation here, this problem and problem G, those will be the two most challenging problems that you'll see. Okay, so if you can make it through those, you're good to go. I'm going to rewrite cosine as just cosine of theta over 1. And I'm going to rewrite tangent as, how do I rewrite tangent? Anybody remember from the weekend? Sine over cosine. What is cotangent? Cosine over sine times cosine of theta over 1. All right, let's just look at that basic expression first. You see anything that's going to cancel. It turns out that these cosines do cancel. But that's about it. And my new expression is sine of theta over 1 plus, and here we have cosine squared of theta over sine of theta. And a lot of people get to that point, but then at that point they get lost. They don't know what else to do. And some of it's just about trying to see what things we like to pair together. For example, if I have a cosine squared, what's really nice to have with a cosine squared? A sine squared, right? Because sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. So that's what we like. I don't have a sign here, but if you notice, I do have two fractions. And if you want to add fractions, you have to have common denominators. Right now, they do not have common denominators. If you want to create a common denominator, you need to multiply the top by sine and the bottom by sine. And notice what we have. Sine times sine becomes sine squared. And then I have cosine squared of theta over sine of theta. All of a sudden, I have my sine squared and my cosine squared. Sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. And the new denominator is sine of theta. What's 1 over sine? Cosecant. G is going to follow very, very similar. I have G there so that first one, usually people, it kind of sits in your brain, but you don't fully understand it. Watch what happens in this situation. Sine squared over 1 times 1 over cosine plus cosine over 1. I've got a sine squared. I don't have a cosine squared. What could I do to create a cosine squared? If I want to create common denominators, I'm going to multiply this side, top and bottom, by cosine of theta. Notice now you have common denominators. So here we have sine squared over cosine plus cosine squared over cosine. That's handy. We now have common denominators. Again, sine squared plus cosine squared is 1, and the new denominator is cosine. Remember what 1 divided by cosine is? Secant. Letter H, 1 minus cosine of theta over 1 times sine of theta over 1 times tangent is sine of theta over cosine of theta. What do you notice? Cosines are gone. I have 1 minus sine squared. Is there anything that tells us what 1 minus sine squared is? If we look at the sheet right here, if you see a 1 and a cosine squared, you should be drawn to your attention right here. 1 minus, what was it, 1 minus sine squared? 1 minus sine squared, it says, is cosine squared. So we can go back to here, simply put in its place cosine squared. It's kind of a review of the couple that we practiced the other day. Let's see if you can pick up the first step. Anybody know what the first step is for K? Hint, it's not going to be rewrite in terms of sine and cosine. Anybody see what I can do? Starts with an F. Factor. I factor out a cosine squared. When you do factor out a cosine squared, you're left with 1 plus cotangent squared. Cosine squared times 1 and cotangent squared. If I check my sheet, sure enough, 1 and cotangent squared, that makes cosecant squared. Cosine squared of theta over 1 times cosecant. Cosecant is 1 over what? Sine. Anybody remember what cosine over sine is? Cotangent. And last one, to get started on L, instead of factoring, we're going to distribute. And hopefully you remember that the relationship between cosecant and sine is that they are reciprocals. And when you multiply two reciprocals, what do you get? You get 1. So cosecant times sine is 1. Cosecant times sine is 1 cosine squared. And all of a sudden we get something we can work with. 1 minus cosine squared is sine squared. Are